All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to get started, and I am really pleased to first have a guest with us who's going to be giving the land acknowledgement. Alexa Job, the program coordinator from the American Indian Resource Center, is here to give us the land acknowledgement.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Alexa Job. I use she, they pronouns, and I am a proud member of the Big Jim Band of the Absentee Shawnee Tribe of Oklahoma. I also have the privilege of serving as the American Indian Resource Center's program coordinator here at UCSC. Thank you for inviting me here today to open up this space. I would like to begin our program by acknowledging the land that we are currently gathered on. The university has a land acknowledgement that was created in collaboration with the Amamutsin Tribal Band, a local tribe whose territory is just over the hill where Highway 17 crosses, and our campus, to ensure that we enter each event with the understanding that we are all visitors to this land and hope to one day give proper recognition, reverence, and power to the traditional stewards. Let's take a moment to connect with the land that we are currently standing or sitting on. Inhale and exhale. Feel your feet and wiggle your toes. Think about where you are sitting. I would like to acknowledge and honor the ancestors of this land and their descendants who steward the land that we exist upon today. Each day is a good day to build a relationship with Mother Earth, who provides for all of our relatives. No matter what part of Mother Earth your family is from, we all have a relationship and responsibility to the land. Let's build a healthy relationship together. I recently attended an event with Chairman Valentin Lopez of the Amamutsin Tribal Band, who noted that while the Amamutsin are close relatives, the traditional inhabitants of this space were the Awaswas-speaking Yupi, whose last descendants perished at Mission Santa Cruz. He encouraged the audience to ensure that true history be told all the time, so I wanted to share that with you today as well. With that being said, I will now read the UCSC land acknowledgement. The land on which we gather is the unceded territory of the Awaswas-speaking Yupi tribe, the Amamutsin Tribal Band, comprised of the descendants of indigenous people taken to Mission Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma. I invite you to consider how you can show gratitude to the land, to acknowledge the soil beneath your feet, the nature upon which our campus is placed, and reflect on the communities that have historically lived on and cared for it. And if you've connected with anything I've said today, let's stay in touch. Please take a moment to connect with our campus's American Indian Resource Center to learn more about how you can support local Native communities. Thank you to all my relations. Niyawe te pele taka.
I'm now pleased to introduce Herbie Lee, our now I'm screwing it up, our AVPAA for a few more months. Thanks.
Thank you, Robin. I'm delighted to be here at this convocation in 2025 in our 9th year of our Teaching and Learning Center. As my last year as Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, I wanted to reflect briefly on how far we've come. In 2015, at the instigation of the Senate Committee on Teaching, I worked with the Committee on Teaching chair at the time, Judy Scott, to come up with the vision for our new teaching center. At the time, we called it CITL, the Center for Innovations in Teaching and Learning. While historically teaching centers have focused on teaching and the mechanics of teaching, it was important to me that we move in the more modern direction of focusing on student learning, where the goal of teaching is to facilitate student learning. Now, this may sound obvious now, but at the time, the teaching centers were much more focused on the mechanics of teaching without any measurement of the impact on student learning. And at the end of the day, the reason that we teach is so that students can learn. I want to give sort of a brief anecdote of when I was a graduate student and I was engaged with our teaching center at our institution. They did really just focus on the mechanics, what good teaching was supposed to look like. They showed us a video of good teaching. There was an instructor up in the front of a lecture hall, animated, using props, getting questions from the audience, looked very engaging. This was great on video, looked like great teaching. But I was a TA for him that semester, and the students were lost. And so this became apparent to me as a graduate student that there was a disconnect between what the teaching center was telling us was good teaching and whether or not the students were learning. And so this also fed into, as we're founding a teaching center, let's make sure that we're focused on student learning. So I was really grateful for the collaboration with the Committee on Teaching and the support from the EVC in launching our new teaching center. And now we have a teaching learning center that is a place where faculty and graduate students can go to learn, to get advice, to get help, and to find community. Many faculty have changed their teaching practices, redesigned their classes, with a noticeable impact on student success, and making progress on closing equity gaps. I'm grateful for our founding director, Jody Green, who was instrumental in achieving this vision, growing the center in its stature and effectiveness, and our current director, Robin Duncan, who maintains this legacy and helps guide the center in its continued evolution. And we've had a lot of evolution over this time. One big impact came with the pandemic, when we all suddenly had to switch to remote instruction. That was a big change, and the CITL and online education really helped us through that. And as we came out of the pandemic, a lot of faculty continued to use a lot of technology in their instruction, much more so than before the pandemic. As a result, we saw this synergy between these two different units, the CITL and the online education. We merged them to form the Teaching and Learning Center. And this has helped us be effective in thinking about all modes of teaching together. The next big evolution looks like it's going to be artificial intelligence. This is going to have a huge impact on what we teach and how we teach it. And so delighted that our keynote speaker today will be talking with us about this topic. And the TLC will be here to help faculty think through what this means for their courses. So now I'd like to introduce Lori Kletzer, Campus Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor.
Thank you, Herbie. It's really a pleasure to be here this afternoon or evening or whatever we call this particular hour. And as we come together and reflect, as we do every year or a number of years, right, at the TLC Convocation, come together to reflect on teaching and learning, and particularly this year, to come together to think and talk about one of the most consequential topics facing higher ed, which is a strange sentence to say right now in this moment where there are a number of consequential topics that are facing higher education and society more broadly, and that is generative and predictive artificial intelligence. So I am really excited and grateful to have this particular opportunity tonight. And I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Siva Vaidhyanathan for coming and joining us today and really helping us kind of spark this conversation. We're really honored to have you here. I know, and from others for sure, that your work has sparked important conversations before and with your presence here across, on campus as it has across the country. And I think this is really going to be an exciting evening for us. It's hard not to feel right now kind of surrounded by questions about generative AI. You know, it has and will continue, I think, to introduce a profound shift in how we think about knowledge, about creativity, about teaching, about learning, you know, from large language models like ChatGPT or Claude to AI-powered image and video tools. Generative AI is really rapidly reshaping how information is created and shared and understood in ways that I'm pretty sure that I don't have any real grasp of the kind of scale and boundaries of. So I know I have a lot to think about and learn about. And I know that this community here, as in instructors and teachers and pedagogues around the country, have really responded with a clear sense of urgency. I think that urgency in part comes from, for those who don't really have a great grasp, like me, of the boundaries or just where this is all going to go. That, to me, creates a sense of urgency. It also, in its prospects, creates a sense of thoughtfulness and just deep curiosity about what is possible, right? What's possible as this technology and beyond technology reshapes our classrooms and reshapes a good part of the world around us. I am very grateful that we have the center, the Teaching and Learning Center, to be one of the signposts on campus to really help us navigate how we think about generative AI in teaching and in learning. The TLC has been a leader and a partner with critical campus faculty, the Senate, staff, and administrative leaders in helping us understand so far, right, how we understand the really quickly changing ramifications of AI. And the TLC has created spaces for experimentation, for honest conversation, where instructors can think critically, ask questions, think about new approaches, and share insights with each other. And I really look forward to that all continuing. I want to just take a minute or so to reflect that this focus today and this week on generative AI reflects not just an idea that a few people had to say, oh, let's make generative AI the focus in 2025, right? That the work doesn't happen that way, right? It was really 2 years of sustained work, right, on the part of the TLC. And I just want to recount some very select, so no offense intended here when I leave things out. But the 23-24 learning community on teaching and learning in the age of generative AI that was led by Zach Zimmer, Heather Shearer, and Michael Tassio, that was an important kind of formative moment. And we had campus events during Teaching Week last year as well as this year, and we are participating in nationwide conversations as well. You know, as we know, generative AI is not just a conversation that we're having at this convocation and in teaching and learning, right? The AI is a conversation that we're happening throughout research, throughout the dissemination of knowledge. It is a technology that's going to have an impact on us in all of what we do. Herbie expressed gratitude to our TLC faculty director, Robin Duncan, and I want to do the same because generative AI is one more topic where we can and should be grateful to the TLC for the intellectual leadership and the infrastructure and direction that you've brought to us as we try to grapple with things that we know are going to profoundly change our lives. And the TLC has not only been a resource, but has really been a catalyst for the kind of thinking that we know we're capable of doing. I am just so deeply appreciative of that work. I think gatherings like this, maybe particularly at this time, really show the best of what higher education has to offer, right? That we are dedicated to learning and to curiosity and to critical engagement and open inquiry, to rigorous debate, all those things we need to bring to generative AI. And that they are, of course, the very ideals that are under attack at this moment. So I think gatherings like this certainly remind me, and I think should remind all of us about what's at stake in this moment for us. Before I close, I want to take this opportunity to express my deep gratitude to Herbie Lee. You know, as many of you know, Herbie will conclude his service as Vice Provost for Academic Affairs at the end of June, but we're not saying goodbye because Herbie will embark on new service as the Interim Dean of Social Sciences as Catherine Mitchell steps away and joins the sociology faculty. Herbie has provided steady, thoughtful leadership to academic affairs for 15 years. These convocations have developed and flourished in this period of time of Herbie's leadership. And he deserves, as he mentioned, but he didn't say it this way, Herbie deserves great, great, great credit, right, for bringing a Center for Teaching and Learning back to campus. I have been here long enough to know that there was a way back in time version. Didn't look at all like the version we have now. And as he said, again, I'm going to say it differently, he deserves great credit for the wisdom of hiring Jody Green to establish CITL, and then giving Jody the space and resources and support to run and expand with the idea to produce where we've gotten and to produce a center whose legacy Robin is very much expanding and caring for. So Herbie, your steady and confident support of this effort has produced all of what we know to be now a leadership teaching and learning center, not only for us, right, but for the nation. There is a lot more to Herbie's academic affairs portfolio to commend, and that's for a different moment. But I didn't want this moment to go by at the TLC Convocation to express my thanks and my deep gratitude for all of what Herbie has done for the campus. So I'm going to get out of the way. We're on to the program. Let's continue to share ideas, challenge assumptions, and build a learning environment that meets this moment with clarity and purpose. Thank you.
All right, we are almost to the program. All right, thank you so much, Lori. Thank you so much, Herbie. Thank you so much, Alexa, for starting us off. I have a few things that I would like to say, and I'd also like to introduce you to our speaker tonight. So I want to begin with gratitude. I want to say thank you to all of you that are familiar faces that have been part of our teaching and learning community. I also want to say thank you and welcome to those that are joining us for the first time and that are engaging with our teaching and learning community at Convocation for the first time. And I was delighted to already meet members of our community and others from our campus that I haven't interacted with already. And that really brings me a lot of joy to see new faces at our events. I also want to say thank you to all of those joining us on Zoom as well, and appreciate you making space and time to be with us virtually. All right, so in thinking about the topic that we wanted to bring to Convocation this year, there were many, many, many relevant things that we could have chosen. And this is back in the fall when we were thinking about what this topic might be. Generative AI and what it means for the enterprise of higher education, though, really emerged as something our campus, like all campuses across the nation, were really grappling with, and as Lori noted, in all kinds of ways. So not just teaching and learning, but in many other avenues as well. We were really excited to invite our guest tonight, Dr. Siva Vaidhyanathan, to join us to speak on this topic because of his scholarship. It includes 2 books, The Googleization of Everything and Anti-Social Media, which explore how digital tools have impacted the way we think, our creativity, and much more. What we didn't know right away was how even more relevant Dr. Vaidhyanathan's scholarship would feel right now in this moment. It's a moment when higher education, free speech, our values around diversity and inclusion, our creative arts, our science, and so much more are really literally under attack from many different ways. And Dr. Vaidhyanathan's work not only considers the impacts of technology and social media on our thinking, but he has thought really deeply about its impact on democracy. In a TV interview with Virginia Public Media back in October of 2023, Dr. Vaidhyanathan was asked how social media undermines our democracy. And he said, social media undermines our democracy largely by keeping us segmented, keeping us in our tribes, in our interest groups, keeping us with a constant sense of affirmation, unquote. He then goes on to say, quote, so all of that stimulation over time, all of that affirmation, that segmentation, so that you're pretty much only conversing with people who agree with you, after a while that solidifies and really undermines a sense of citizenship. Because a responsible citizen is one who is open and respectful of his or her neighbors, regardless of where they come from and what their assumptions are. And that's hard work. That's always been hard work. It was hard work long before we had social media and cell phones in our lives, and it's even harder now, unquote. When considering how we arrived at this moment and why There are many reasons, and scholars will no doubt be writing about it for decades. I have no doubt, though, that the siloing, segmenting, and affirming nature of our media, as described by Dr. Vaidhyanathan, has played a major role. And I can't help but see higher education as the antithesis and perhaps the antidote to this division. Whereas social media keeps us segmented and affirms what we already think, the experience of college should be exactly the opposite of that. The exposure to new people, new ideas, the purposeful confrontation of our assumptions, and learning how to converse with people with different ideas than ourselves, this is what we all strive for as educators. Thus, I am even more excited to have Dr. Vaidhyanathan join us this evening because his scholarship really sits squarely at the intersection of technology, including Gen AI and social media, with citizenship, democracy, free speech, and education, topics incredibly relevant and important to our current moment. We are also honored to have our colleague, Dr. Pranav, Anand, Professor of Linguistics and Faculty Director of the Humanities Institute, who is also our partner and co-sponsor for tonight's event, join us as moderator of our conversation with Dr. Vaidhyanathan. Dr. Anand has been a leader in thinking about Gen AI on our campus and beyond. He wrote in April 2024 about large language models like ChatGPT that, quote, as we contemplate perhaps being on the cusp of a fundamental change in our relation to writing, it is important to think critically about its practice, what we might be losing, and what we might gain, unquote. Dr. Anand's critical approach to Gen AI, both as something to be skeptical of and as a tool that may have something to offer the creative process, is something we in the TLC have really appreciated as we've considered how to support instructors that approach these technologies from a spectrum of viewpoints. We deeply appreciate his willingness to share his own expertise and be with us tonight. Before we get to our program, I also want to take a few minutes to recognize the people and partners that have helped our campus do the necessary work to try to understand and respond to the many ways Gen AI is influencing our work. EVC Kleitzer mentioned that our campus is engaged in nearly 2 years of work to thoughtfully understand how to engage with this technology and how to support our instructional community and our students. This work from the learning communities to the creation of the AI Council, which was co-chaired by Vice Chancellor Aisha Jackson, has greatly benefited from the leadership and efforts of our Assistant Vice Provost for Educational Innovation, Michael Tassio. Michael has approached this work with care and great respect for the many valid perspectives held by all members of our campus, from those that are highly skeptical and concerned about Gen AI and academic integrity, and to those who are experimenting with it, and the very many of us that hold multiple of these perspectives. I want to thank Michael for his leadership in this area on our campus. I also want to thank our new director for the Academic Integrity Office, Dr. Greer Murphy. Our partnership over the past year has been incredibly helpful, and we've benefited greatly from Greer's expertise as we navigated the impacts of this technology on academic integrity, among other collaborations. Of course, Gen AI is not the only topic that the TLC has been engaged in this year. We've been continuing our close partnership with our Hispanic Serving Institution Initiatives team through our work on transfer students and our faculty fellows group. I especially want to thank Sharis Herzon, HSI Director, and Saskia Casanova, Associate Professor of Psychology, whom I have personally learned a great deal from in the past year through this partnership. I also want to thank IRAPs, especially Leo Rosen, Shirley Truong, Cinnamon Lynn Danube, Randy Yuang, and Julian Fernald for their continuing partnership in supporting our campus, and to the Assessment Office, ALEAC, especially Anna Scher, Priscilla Sung, and Dory Wheeler. Josh Warburg from the AVP's office, as well as Suzanne Alonzo in the Division of Academic Affairs, have also been critical partners to the TLC. And I'd also like to acknowledge TLC's longstanding relationship with the Academic Senate Committee on Teaching, which, as you've already heard from both Lori and Herbie, was essential to the founding of CITL and also to the future success of supporting teaching on our campus. Of course, our campus leadership have been critical partners, and I want to recognize Chancellor Cindy LaRive, CBEVC Lori Kleitzer, TLC's founding director and associate campus provost Jody Green, who's joining us virtually, I think, and Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs and Success, Akira Bradley Armstrong, for their support of the campus instructional community. I particularly want to thank Associate Vice Chancellor for Student Success and Equity, Ebony Williams, whom we have partnered with on the Experiential Learning Summit and so much more over the past year. Now, one person I want to briefly offer special recognition to that has been instrumental to the creation of our Teaching Learning Center, as you've already heard, and has been a champion for the support of teaching on our campus, is Vice Provost of Academic Affairs, Herbie Lee. Herbie will be stepping down, as you've heard, after 15 years, and his leadership and accomplishments in this role have been many. Most importantly, though, from my perspective, is that he has been instrumental in helping create our Teaching and Learning Center. Not only did he diligently work to do this, create the center, he has been a true champion of the work since then. A respected teacher himself, Herbie won the Excellence in Teaching Award early in his career at UCSC, and he has been guided by a desire to support all who teach on our campus. On a personal note, I've deeply appreciated Herbie's mentorship and leadership style and his commitment to helping our campus more fully embody our equity and inclusion goals and support teaching in all of its forms. Herbie, I would love for you to come up because we have a special recognition, a special plaque that we have done for you. I think it goes this way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hillary has the box. All right. Finally, I would like to ask our Teaching Center staff to stand. You know who you are. Please, all of you, stand up. Thank you. I want to pause and offer all of these wonderful people recognition and gratitude for all of the work that they do. It is a real privilege to work alongside a group of people that bring such expertise, dedication, thoughtfulness, and care to their work, and who support all who teach on our campus each and every day. Two people in particular deserve special recognition tonight for their role in making tonight's events happen. Hillary Shallett-Bennett, our program coordinator, and Sam Foster, our managing director. They started planning for this event back in the fall, and they have really made this evening possible. So thank you. All right, without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker. Dr. Siva Vaidhyanathan is the Robertson Professor of Media Studies and Director of the Center for Media and Citizenship at the University of Virginia. He is the author of Anti-Social Media, How Facebook Disconnects Us and Undermines Democracy, Intellectual Property, A Very Short Introduction, and the Googleization of Everything and Why We Should Worry. After 5 years as a professional journalist, he earned a PhD in American Studies from the University of Texas at Austin. He is a fellow at the New York Institute for the Humanities and a faculty associate of the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard. He was born and raised in Buffalo, New York, and resides in Charlottesville, Virginia. We will be hearing from Dr. Vaidhyanathan first, and during this time, we invite you to use the cards on your seat for those in person or the chat for those in our virtual audience to jot down questions that come up for you. We will collect these before the moderated portion of our session and ask as many of your questions as we can accommodate. And with that, I'm delighted to welcome Siva Vaidhyanathan.
Thanks very much for coming out to hear me tonight and for being part of this event, this conversation, and of course, more than 2 years of thought, concern, deliberation about the ways in which artificial intelligence is changing the work that we do, the goals that we have for our students, the opportunities our students might have, and as I want to introduce today, the very nature of our government and democracy. When, let's say a year ago, when we were all thinking through these issues and mostly concerned about academic integrity, it's hard to imagine that at this point we would be reflecting with more concern on the ways in which these technologies are being embedded in our systems of government from the top down. At a rapid pace with no accountability and no transparency, with seemingly no oversight, no examination, no study. It's the very opposite of intelligence, really, that we're seeing imposed from Washington, D.C., through Washington, D.C. And this has been madness. It's been madness on so many different levels. You've felt it in your daily lives. You've seen it in the eyes of your students. You've probably felt it through the consequences it will have on your families. Almost every way in which the federal government affects our lives is almost instantly different just 60 days in. Actually, I'm sorry, 100 days in. We're actually at 100 days, can you imagine? 99 days past when the war in Ukraine was supposed to have been ended, according to some promises. But let's not talk about that. Let's talk about artificial intelligence in its various forms. Yesterday, so by the way, my talk has changed significantly in the last 24 hours because that's the world we live in. Yesterday, in a flurry of other announcements about higher education and education, the White House put out an executive order establishing a high-level committee that is supposed to figure out how we are going to completely redesign K through 12 education in this country to embed artificial intelligence into every aspect of it. We often use the phrase K through 12 as if it's some unified system, but think about the K part for a moment. I'm not really sure what they mean by this. However, they have appointed this, I use the word high level in scare quotes, because it seems the membership of this group that will be thinking through the ways in which artificial intelligence will be embedded in K through 12 education includes such notable experts as the Secretary of Agriculture, the Secretary of Labor, obviously the Secretary of Education, former wrestling CEO, and the only person on that list, there's about 6 other people, the only person on that list who seems to have any subject matter expertise is the special advisor to the president on crypto. So it's difficult to see what they're going to come up with, but the first thing they're going to do is one of those classic Silicon Valley contests to try to solicit plans for how one might go about transforming K through 12 education. The emphasis within this plan, though, is not just on training, they actually use the word training, to empower K through 12 students to be able to participate in the AI economy, right? That's standard language that is often in the preamble of policy statements about education. And of course, embed the tools and work the tools through the process of teaching and learning with really no indication of what those tools might look like or be like. But it also emphasizes lifelong learning. It talks about lifelong learning, and in other words, people who are beyond K through 12 can be sort of retrained and re-engaged with the AI economy or the economy run by AI. And a series of internships that the federal government will apparently coordinate and fund through private enterprise to allow for students who have been adequately trained in the skills of AI to enter the workforce through these internships. Or actually, internships is not the word that they use. I'm trying to remember what it is. Absent from this description of how AI will change education and how education will change AI is any mention of higher education, which is kind of bizarre given the fact that higher education is the site where most of this work is being done, has been done thoughtfully, is being done thoughtfully. It's where AI originated. It's an academic field of study and has been for nearly 60 years. And yet our community was left out of this. At my first reading of it was, oh, thank goodness, they're not looking this way when they're looking at the complete top to bottom re-engineering of everything, even though this has going to have profound effects on what we do. That's if there's actually any execution. And with this administration, it's difficult to see what execution looks like. However, my second reading of it made me worry, given that earlier in the day, the president or the White House issued an executive order basically threatening to take over and undermine the accreditation system, that maybe they're not worried about whether we exist or not, right? This is like a vision of a transformed AI-based economy, AI-based society that doesn't need higher education, right? It might not need the skills or insight or wisdom or facilities or all of this stuff that we do, that we provide. Perhaps they see it as some sort of remarkable democratization of learning, empowered by AI, energized by AI, focused on AI. Perhaps they are just saying, like, this is about K through 12 and we'll work on the higher education element of it next. It's difficult to say, it's difficult to see. This stuff keeps rolling out so fast that half the time we're speculating about what its intents are and what its effects are. Nonetheless, it's disturbing in its skeletal nature. Just as what we've seen happen in Washington, D.C. in the last 100 days is disturbing in its actual nature, but also in its skeletal nature. By that I mean the dismissal of thousands of federal workers with the speculative replacement of their duties with AI systems. I mean, this is a pretty explicit goal that Elon Musk and his musketeers have put forth. It's been sort of coordinated through the General Services Administration, and there seems to be this effort to create these AI-based toolkits that are going to they'll be rolled out for customer service in all these different areas, customer service, what used to be called service, in all these different areas of the government. So, of course, they're closing down all the local Social Security offices, and they're eliminating the phone-based service for Social Security problems, which of course just makes it less likely anybody's going to get paid as they deserve. And the only way to interact with the Social Security office soon enough will be chatbots, and we all know how well those work with airlines and banks. But that seems to be the plan here. And again, these are black boxes. These are systems that are half-baked, that are not quite ready from what anybody can see and say, that seemingly are not subject to any sort of basic accountability, standard contracting processes with the federal government, which should take months or sometimes years. There seems to be no review. The General Services Administration has been gutted in itself and replaced. The people there have been replaced by people who work in this field. It's all maddening and deeply concerning. So all of the structures of federal government are essentially, if they have their way, being taken over by these black boxes. So that's happening from the top down. And again, a year ago, we were worried about whether our students were cheating. What a quaint problem, right? What a comforting problem, right? Well, it yielded a lot of one-on-one discussions. Sure, it took up a lot of our time, but what a nice problem to have. Look, in addition, we know that what's going on in the federal government is the grand unification and highly illegal unification of sets of data from various federal agencies, including the IRS, which ever since the 1974 Privacy Act is supposed to be completely sealed off from all other federal systems. And it seems like the goal of DOGE is to create a master database or several large databases where they can do a tremendous amount of harvesting, processing, cross-referencing, relational work that can execute all sorts of orders, right? It's possible to link up what's going on with the State Department and a collection of visas with what's going on in the Department of Housing and Urban Development, so you can kick immigrants out of houses, right, out of public housing, which is an explicit goal of this administration. And that's just one of many possible uses of this unaccountable black box technology that will be executing the will of a handful of people, and there seems to be no oversight and no way through it. Okay, but look, this talk is about the ideological roots of artificial intelligence. So this talk is supposed to examine the ideas that have motivated the rush to deploy both generative artificial intelligence and predictive artificial intelligence into both our computer systems and our lives. I would like to consider the effects on our collective intelligence and our habits of creativity and collaboration. What problems do we hope to solve with this suite of technologies? What do we gain and what do we lose? Now, these questions are inspired by one of my mentors, Neil Postman, who used to always ask or sort of instruct his readers and, in fact, his students. I wasn't one of his students, I was a colleague, to ask basic questions about new technologies. What problem is it intended to solve? This is often just elided. We don't actually ask this question. What problem was this intended to solve? I ask my students this all the time, and I challenge them. I say, go through all of your apps and find one that does something people didn't do before the invention of that app. And don't just respond that this helps me do something faster. We know that, right? It is often about speed and convenience, but is there a new activity? Is there something you could, or human beings could not do before that, or did not do before, that are replicated on this? And I've yet to find a student who can say, yes, here's an app that does something that we didn't do before. So what problem is it intended to solve? What values does this new technology enhance? What values does this new technology inhibit? And what does it replace in our lives, if anything, right? What does it, the second part of that question is, what previous technologies are folded into the new technology? But that first question, what is it intended to solve, I think is a deeply important one. And let me reflect again on this difference between generative AI and predictive AI, because we're facing both of these things coming at us at a higher rate than before, but neither of these things are new. If you have been using Google for the last decade, you've been using generative AI. That's how it completes your search bar entries before you have, right? How it suggests things that often are not what you wanted, but sound reasonable, right? But they're very much an echo of what everybody else is searching for. And that's just one example of generative AI on a fairly low level. But also predictive AI has been built into these systems, into our social media systems, into our search systems, into just about everything that Google and Meta and Microsoft and Amazon and Apple have been building for the past 15 to 20 years. It's been an incremental process. It's been built into these systems, all of these technologies have been built into these systems, generative and predictive, in ways that have been subtle and sort of brought to us piecemeal. And that was reasonable because, of course, they want to do elaborate testing on this stuff. They don't want to roll out too many products too fast that don't work very well. And so they've been doing a lot of segmented tests with small groups and A/B testing and whatnot. And that's why we haven't really thought about it much until the last 3 years after ChatGPT came into our lives with this branded notion of AI as being something big, transformative, here, and urgent. And this branding exercise then has made the rest of the tech industry scramble. Once OpenAI made this move, the rest of the tech industry had to scramble and be upfront about its AI capabilities, which is why now we keep getting asked to embed AI into our Microsoft Office work. Google is showing us generative AI results instead of search results now, and all those other things. Right now, it's unavoidable, and it's now on everybody's mind, which is great business if you're in my business, but it has lots of other effects in the world. All right, so what are the foundations, the ideological foundations of AI? Its goal seems to be efficiency in all areas, whether it's predictive or generative. It's about saving us time, effort, and money. It doesn't necessarily mean it will save us time, effort, or money, but that seems to be the selling point of it. It seems to be the goal. And again, that question, what problem does it solve? If that is a problem, like if we actually need to do things faster, maybe cheaper, although I'm not convinced, that never seems to work, then that is a reasonable problem to solve. But efficiency basically is the primary value we're talking about. In almost every one of these cases, the case for it is efficiency. You can see that in the Doge justification. The primary justification is efficiency. The public justification is efficiency. Let's get rid of all these people with their health benefits and their sick days and their vacations and the days they come in not quite up to the task and all the mistakes that human beings make, and replace them with systems that don't take a day off and don't have to worry about sick kids. So efficiency seems to be a primary value. I would argue that there is a deeper hidden value that I'll get to at the end. To get there, we've had to quantify all aspects of the human experience. And we've been busy doing this for about 30 years now. As soon as we invited devices and technologies into our lives that could easily track our preferences, our moves, our curiosities, our fetishes, almost everything we care about and do now is tracked and quantified. Once you could track and quantify things and efficiently work through almost all human behavior as if it is a math problem, you enable prediction and you enable generation of mimicking human expression. To do this, you have to frame cognition as computation, right? The old debate of whether cognition is computation or whether cognition is something extra, especially human, also seems sort of quaint now. I don't think that in reality the cognition as computation argument won in an intellectual sense, but it sure won in a power sense. So John Searle, who made the argument that there is more to consciousness than computation, now is merely a footnote in the battle over this. So what problems are we trying to solve? Again, perceived inefficiencies and the recency bias of human thought seems to be a problem that AI is trying to solve. By that I mean, if you have walked down a path 1,000 times and the last 3 times you saw a tiger, your recency bias will make you fear a tiger, even if statistically it's an unlikely event. But it happened really recently, so you're going to be really worried about tigers. That's not illogical. That's not unreasonable. It's a basic survival tool. And human beings do that. We overemphasize what just happened over what has happened over the long run. We tend to focus on small bits of data that are immediately impressive to us rather than the larger sets of data. So if you want to make decisions and get over recency bias in human decision making, then these systems seem designed well to do that, right? Because they're taking in large sets of data over a long period of time, maybe over a large area, and can either make predictions or recommendations or even move things in the world like your car based on those sorts of things, right? So again, you're driving down the street and several times in the last couple of weeks you've seen a ball roll out and a kid run after the ball. You're going to take extra caution when driving down that street. I've seen it recently. It's impressed in my head. If that same thing happened to you 10 years ago, maybe it's not that much of an impression on you. But to an AI-driven car, the likelihood of that happening is still rather rare, and so the behavior doesn't change as you're going as the car drives you down the street. So getting over recency bias seems to be one of the things. The desire to scale up decision-making to the point where you can generalize decisions seems to be one of the goals. The pursuit of certainty in uncertain domains and foggy domains seems to be one of the goals. And I know I'm not going into depth on any of this. I'm hoping to write all this up in a way that actually gets deep on all these sorts of things. And of course, there is both a corporate interest and a state interest in automating intellectual labor, because intellectual labor is expensive, right? You have to put people through years of training and education and then hope that they can hold up to the demands of a changing workplace. And so intellectual labor is so much more expensive than other forms of human labor. When you take all of these problems that are trying to be solved, you come up and distill it into one thing. There is a problem that AI is trying to solve, and that problem is people. People are the problem at every step. I have yet to see a justification for AI that was meant in any way except to replace the flaws of human beings. Human beings as animals, human beings as social animals, human beings as moral animals, right? Those are the problems. We are the problems. Now, that sounds more insidious than it probably is. It's not like the goal is to eliminate us, but it certainly is to reduce the impact of some of our flaws. Maybe more, but at least that. So what do we gain when we impose these systems into various aspects of our lives? Well, we certainly gain processing power for specific, well-defined tasks, right? Perhaps the best use case that we've seen time and time again, and when people defend or promote the use of AI, the classic one, and I think it's a strong case, is the sort of diagnostic step in breast cancer screening to see whether there are patterns of images, patterns from many hundreds of thousands of images can help better indicate the likelihood that someone would develop a tumor and therefore should undergo a biopsy, in the effort to limit the number of unnecessary biopsies and also not miss any biopsies that probably should go. So to reduce both the false positives and false negatives that human beings, doctors, have when they look at images, right? And so the idea is if we have enough data and enough pattern recognition going on and sophisticated enough algorithms that can learn over time, working with expert doctors over time, you can come up with a screening system that's another layer of the screening system, right? It doesn't cut human beings out. The doctor still makes the recommendation, it's time for a biopsy. The doctor still has their own deep knowledge, deep experience working with the system. The system doesn't replace the doctor. It supplements the doctor's abilities, right? That seems to be a use case that explains processing power for a specific well-defined task. And there's nothing general about that, right? Nor is there anything generative about it, but it is predictive. And look, there's data like that is beyond human scale, right? There's just so much data that we can't expect a human being to sort through all of those images and come up with enough wisdom to be able to make good decisions all the time. There are possibilities for using the generative versions of these systems to create entirely new creative schools, right? Creative activities that we have yet to imagine. And we've seen this time and time again when we've seen new technologies in the creative worlds emerge. We have seen people apply their own imaginations in ways we could not have predicted, right? We saw that with photography. We saw that with film. We've seen it right up through the phonograph, right? The phonograph was supposed to just be a replication system that meant that you could record music in one place, have a reliable document that would reasonably replicate the experience of performed music until one day, somebody in the South Bronx decided to move it the other way and create rhythm out of it, right? A completely new use of the turntable that created a whole new art form, or at least energized a whole new art form. So that is something we have yet to see, but something we could very well see, right? As generative AI and even predictive AI becomes available to more popular uses, you can imagine artists and creators coming up with some really stunning new ways of creating that works against the sort of the nightmare scenario that we're just deadening all creativity, which I will get to because it's actually something I'm deeply worried about. All right, what do we lose if we impose all of these systems in our lives in all these different ways? I'm afraid we lose sort of the contextual nature of human judgment, because these are universalizing machines, right? When they're making predictions and analyses about human behavior and about the ways the world works, they are not taking into account specificity. They're not taking into account local histories. They're not taking into account local values. And if you're shifting decision-making for policy or shifting decision-making for the distribution of resources away from human beings who are sensitive to community needs or sensitive to local histories or sensitive to the ways in which previous decisions have created injuries, and you're just making decisions through analytical systems that are trying to optimize for certain goals, you're flushing out a lot of the contextuality, the contextual nature of human judgment. And I worry deeply about that. I think we also lose a lot of the social dimensions of knowledge creation. If we're going to depend more and more on these systems to generate the texts from which we get knowledge, like let's assume that this stuff actually starts working better, right? We get fewer hallucinations, fewer completely made up citations, we get more dependable, less troubling results out of large language models. You are basically turning to these systems more than you are turning to communities of knowledge creation, knowledge aggregation, knowledge promotion, and knowledge revision, right? So you're moving things away from this discursive communities that create knowledge on the fly and revise for the moment, and sort of fixing it in the algorithmic patterns and rhythms that come with the systems. Now, that would never happen overnight, right? That's a long process, but it is something we might lose or might minimize or not even appreciate that much. So ultimately, I think what we're losing is what we're really losing is like the capacity to think collectively, the sense of connection that we have with our sort of community-based ways of creating knowledge, and a sense of context when we're making decisions and creating knowledge and valuing knowledge. So those 3 C's: capacity, connection, and context. And again, I really want to go deeper into this stuff. And when I'm writing all this up, I'm actually working on a book that comes out of this, so I'm hoping to get deeper into it. So I know I'm rushing through a lot of this stuff. There are hidden costs to this outsourcing, which is really the subject of my talk. I worry deeply about the atrophy of collective intelligence. Right? Collective intelligence is something that we see, sometimes we call it culture, right? But this notion of collective intelligence, that we might actually deliberate together to analyze our problems, predict what might happen, and assess the best ways forward, taking into account a variety of values, a variety of concerns, and a variety of needs. That's what we're supposed to be doing in a democracy, right? The capacity for deliberation is something that we have not paid much attention to over the past few decades. We have let those muscles atrophy already, long before we had these systems that could make decisions for us and make predictions for us. We have not been attending to the norms and values and practices of deliberation. Right? Democracy has been flattened into a consumer project, one in which we are offered every few months or every few years choices, like we're shopping in a supermarket, and we make these almost Boolean choices of where we want to go as a community, a society, a state, even a university, and we've missed out on the messy stuff, which is the deliberation. And through most of my work, I have been emphasizing the fact that any system that we move more of our energy to, more of our attention to, that doesn't foster deliberation, undermines those abilities, those capacities, creates atrophy. And so again, long before we had any of these AI systems, at least marked as AI systems, we were already not attending to deliberation. We have been disinvesting in the institutions that foster deliberation. We have been eliding the notion that this is a skill set that we as citizens should be working on. We have not been valuing rooms like this, institutions like this. We have not been recognizing the places where we do deliberate, whether we deliberate in a church basement or we deliberate in a bar room or a coffee house or a barbershop. We have not really recognized it for what it is. We have been promoting this idea of debate, that's what we do in a democracy. Well, debate, in addition to being a very masculinist idea, is all about winning, right? It's all about defeating the other side. It's about scoring points, but it's not about achieving any sort of vision about a better future. It's not about people with different values and different suggestions and different paths working through their differences, weighing their differences, and figuring out a way to work toward a shared goal, even if they're using different methods. And so those sorts of, again, messy skills are things we should be investing more in. It seems to me that by investing more in these systems as systems of governance and decision-making, we are moving farther and farther away from deliberation, farther and farther away from the messy and human-based habits that we so desperately need to actually have democracy. In addition, we're growing more and more dependent on opaque systems that are proprietary. The more we use proprietary machines, proprietary systems, proprietary software in our decision-making, the less we as citizens can say when things go wrong, the less we can know about what things go wrong. The best example of this is in predictive policing, where police systems around the country, Los Angeles being the best example, are buying proprietary systems to guide the distribution of police resources into different neighborhoods at different times. Based on historical data, right? They are sort of deciding on the fly based on certain conditions, right? If there's a big event happening in Los Angeles, the predictive policing system will move person power to one place versus another. If there's a particular season, other things will move, for instance. And those sorts of systems are inscrutable. We are not allowed to understand what values are baked into those algorithms. We're not allowed to understand where the training data comes from. It's all proprietary. We see the same thing in systems that judges in Wisconsin are using to recommend sentencing for criminal defendants, where they are assessing and predicting recidivism based on a number of factors that we're not allowed to understand. Again, based on historical data about recidivism, which, of course, in both the case of predictive policing and sentencing, means it reflects the decisions human beings have been making for many decades, and we know that human beings have been making very bad decisions in both of those areas for many decades. Nonetheless, this is all getting baked in, and the companies promise that they are adjusting, they're correcting for historical biases, but there's no accountability and there's no transparency because these are proprietary systems. That also concentrates power in fewer and fewer hands, and this is a huge problem. We've seen enough of this. Massive power concentrated in a handful of companies and the people who own these companies. If we agree that that's a problem already in society, and I hope we do, we're just yielding more to this. And we know who these people are right now because they happen to be running our government, our federal government at least, and influencing our state and local governments at every level, including in California, which is not that much of a rebel in these matters. We also should worry about the hidden cost of the narrowing of imaginative possibilities. And by this, I mean not just the notion of what artists might do, but what those of us who are fans and consumers of art might be encountering. Because the predictive nature of these systems, when applied to something as common as Spotify, funnel us into listening habits or viewing habits, in the case of Netflix, that are more and more like what we have indicated we already like, giving us less serendipity, less surprise, less annoyance, less trouble, but ultimately it narrows our imaginative worlds over time. And of course, we do have to be worried about these historical biases being deeply embedded and fixed in the systems that make decisions for us. So those are the hidden costs. I've already talked about the effects on creativity that we should worry about, including homogenization and the sort of funneling of ideas. There's also a potential effect on collaboration and the habits of collaboration. And this is not something I've been able to really delve into, but it's something I think about a lot. And I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts about this, how the creation of the ability for us to sit at our computers and have a variety of seemingly highly intelligent or powerful assistants at our hands might limit our willingness to engage and form teams to work through problems as well, whether that's at work or in artistic creativity or in community problem-solving systems. I'm not sure I'm right about this, but it's something that's kind of bugging me. The privatization of previously communal processes as well, the shifting power dynamics in knowledge work, downgrading certain areas of knowledge work, increasing the value of other areas of knowledge work, and of course, reimagining educational practices, which are inherently collaborative, but we may end up creating solo education processes where the notion of a classroom isn't that important because everything is just being fed to an individual. And we've already seen flashes of this. So the desocialization of knowledge and creative production is something that I worry about. And this is not something, as I said, I've thought through with any depth. And so I'm only offering it to you because you might have better thoughts and deeper thoughts about it than I do. I just have sort of a framework of concern at this point. Now, there are ways in which these tools and technologies can actually enhance our cognitive commons, a phrase I would like to expand upon some more as well. If we think in certain contexts of artificial intelligence as a tool to expand and enhance and extend the power of human beings rather than as a replacement for human beings, we can get somewhere, right? So getting back to the breast cancer screening example, that's an example of an enhancement, an extension of the doctor's eyes in the sort of Marshall McLuhan sense of an extension. That, if we were embedding these systems into our lives with that level of care and concern, is this a tool or is it a replacement? Then we might get somewhere very good, right? Thinking about designing these tools for augmentation rather than automation. That there must be another value beyond efficiency at work. Augmentation, enhancing our capabilities rather than just doing what we already did faster and cheaper. We have to explicitly preserve spaces for human thought and deliberation. And ultimately, we have to keep emphasizing that technology is no good to us if it isn't in the service of human flourishing, rather than merely making things, again, faster, easier, cheaper, and concentrating power and wealth in certain corners. The problem is these ways of using AI or imagining AI to enhance our cognitive commons swims upstream from the core affordances of AI as we know it today, at least commercially produced AI as we know it today. Everything we're seeing come out of those 4 or 5 big companies is intended to create these black boxes, to create efficiencies, to displace human beings, to allow us to imagine an easier life while distracting us or deadening us from human flourishing. So we should, as citizens, have some core questions about the deployment and adoption of these systems. Is there a way to build in space for reflection and assessment so we actually know whether these systems are working for us or against us? Is there a way to maintain human agency in these technological systems, or at least make it very visible? And is there a way of cultivating technological wisdom? We talk a lot about cultivating skills. We talk a lot about cultivating literacy. But cultivating wisdom about technology is a completely different thing. It involves assessing where we want to go, understanding the costs and benefits in ways that are not necessarily countable. We have to have deeper and better and more humane conversations about technology that gets beyond whether we're going to gain or lose jobs, whether we're going to gain or lose time, and whether we're going to gain or lose power. It has to really be about whether it's going to enhance the quality of life for human beings. For those of us in education, we have specific questions. Should we resist this stuff while also studying it? And how can we? Can we trust out-of-the-box systems, commercial systems, that promise to analyze data and scholarship for us? Right? Are these trustworthy systems? We're being offered all these new systems. Can we help build better systems? Are we going to be allowed to get under the hood and figure out how to enhance these systems with feedback? And how is AI different from previous technologies for either research or teaching? Are they differences of scale, or is it something else? And are we just talking about computation, just at a higher level, or are we talking about something that is qualitatively different in our lives of teaching and learning and research? I'm specifically, of course, interested in how AI affects the industries that my own students in media studies are going into or hope to go into: television and film production, music creation and distribution, journalism, game production. And of course, AI is central to all of these different areas. But soon it will, and frankly, it's central to the creation of new automobiles, right? It's being used in design, it's being used in automation of factories, it's being used in all sorts of ways in all sorts of industries. It's just more, I think, more visible in the creative industries right now, or at least more talked about in the creative industries. But I think we have to look at all of these industries as creative industries in order to get a sense of how this might change what we do. Right, so what are we talking about? What is the takeaway here, the ideology of artificial intelligence? I think of it as radical neoliberalism derived from vulgar utilitarianism. All of these systems are meant to optimize something, right? To create the greatest good for the greatest number. It's more the Bentham version of utilitarianism than the John Stuart Mill version of utilitarianism. The less humane, the more calculated version of utilitarianism. But it goes even beyond Bentham, who had core values of enhancing democracy and spreading justice beyond the elites. At its extreme, that vulgar utilitarianism is invoked by some of the most dangerous areas of thought that we have encountered in the past 100 years. It's clearly been used throughout the history of fascism, and it's being invoked in our current versions of fascism all over the world, including in this country. It taps very easily into visions of eugenics, and we're seeing again a reanimation of eugenic dreams coming again from some of the most powerful people in the world. And as promoted and practiced in this country, and especially in some parts of this state, there is an androsupremacy going on here, a sense that these are masculine technologies meant for the mastery of others, and that is a very troubling theme. That is a very troubling ideological base but it's one that the promoters of these tools in our lives, including those who currently basically run our federal government, are quite explicit about. That men should be in charge, and anybody who isn't identifiably a man is a second-class citizen, or maybe not even a citizen. Often they will actually specify white men, but in this, I think we can safely say that there is an andro supremacy at work in the promotion of these systems into our government right now, and the ways it attaches to so many other policies of our government. Now, the last 100 days has given us an opportunity to make these observations more than just paranoid speculation. I wish this were just paranoid speculation, but that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing a very clear movement toward eugenics, toward white supremacy, and toward andro supremacy coming out of the most powerful government in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. And AI is a tool in their efforts. It doesn't have to be, it is though, and we can't get around that. So while we might want to just focus on whether our students are cheating, and we definitely want to focus on whether this is going to help our students think or avoid thinking, that all has to be embedded in this larger question of how we as a society are going to think and how we're going to value each other, because these are not separate questions. So I would like to approach questions about AI in the broadest possible way, in an environmental way, and I don't just mean that in terms of the carbon cost of running these server centers, which is a whole other subject for another talk, but an environmental way in the sense of how it's going to change every day for us, how it's going to change the decisions we make, how we get from point A to point B, and the costs and benefits of dealing with each other as citizens, as long as we can still call ourselves citizens in a democratic republic. Thank you very much. All right, we're gonna talk about fun stuff now, cheerful stuff.
Yeah. Thank you. That was amazing.
Oh, well.
That was very, very, very interesting.
I'm just grumpy.
You're not just grumpy, but you are grumpy. I
I
get
am
the
grumpy,
grumpiness.
yeah.
I
Yes.
mean, grumpy probably doesn't describe it.
All right.
So there are a lot of places to start, but before I start, let me say that those of you who have questions, please write them down or chat them on Zoom, and we will be collecting them, and you will be answering them.
Okay, if I can.
Well, yeah, we'll see.
I have ChatGPT here to answer any questions.
So can I start with the provocation about what the goal of AI is, either efficiency or solving people? I mean, I see that, but I also think that, and you allude to this, like for me, I see it as a tool to solve problems that are too hard for us.
Okay.
And there are many of those out there. So like, for me, it's not the breast cancer thing, it's protein folding. Like,
Yeah.
that is a problem that is beyond our current mathematical, physical capacity, and perhaps our cognitive capacity. And I think there are problems that are probably beyond our cognitive capacity that we could simulate.
That's exactly right. Yes. And again, when you think about, well, first of all, if you stop calling it AI and you think about it in terms of a specific form of computation applied to a specific set of problems, and it is in the service of searching for knowledge or understanding the world or creating a simulation of the world that might enhance our understanding of it, that sounds awesome, right? That sounds almost as good as getting better at breast cancer diagnosis,
Yeah.
right? And that is entirely capable, and within our capability, it's what's happening in the academy,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Which we're crushing or killing in favor of the different flavor of AI that is very much about black boxes in proprietary systems run by a bunch of men who don't really want the best for us.
Yeah, so I think that, like, I've seen, you know, that tension between what happens here and what happens in industry. I mean, it's a perpetual problem, right? I think in all sorts
But
of
an
areas.
acute problem, right?
Now for us.
Yeah, an acute problem right now. I mean, look, it's been a perpetual problem as long as institutions like this, or more likely up the interstate, have been dependent on military funding since the end of World War II, which has like had tremendous externalities, right? All that military research has created the GPS system, which, you know, I think we're all better off for having a GPS system than not. We got around okay before. I do think it has some pretty measurable advantages, right? You know, the notion of packet switching to send messages from point A to point B, which makes for more resilient, more creative, more efficient communication that's not all run by AT&T, is lovely. Definitely an enhancement to the fact that we can call people in Jakarta at no marginal cost now, which we couldn't do, you know, 40 years ago, is lovely. So those all came out of the military academic collaboration, but it also came out of a very different attitude about science, where there was a sense, even among those who were funding science through the military, that basic research might or might not have a direct either military application or commercial application, and that was okay. Because maybe in 30 years it will, maybe in 100 years it will, but if it doesn't, that's okay too, because we're so rich and so comfortable, and let's just do it, right? So the search for basic knowledge was key there, right? There didn't always have to be an immediate payoff.
Yeah.
We've definitely had a shift in our sense of what science is for, I would say, over the last 40 years, and rapidly over the past 20 years. And part of that has been the bubble of the rise in wealth in a handful of particular technologies that I think have distorted our sense of what research is supposed to be about. So I think that's a deeper, older problem. You know, it's one I think we first start seeing in the Reagan years. So many of our problems I think we first start seeing in the Reagan years. And you know, you can see it in the, you know, the ways in which universities were then sort of thought of as serving industry in a rather instrumental way. You know, the Bayh-Dole Act to help universities license patents, which, you know, is a decent thing as opposed to just letting other people benefit without the universities getting any flow from that. At the same time, it really twisted priorities for research toward the quick fix and the quick payoff for universities. But that's a whole other story.
Wait, can I go there? Is
Sure.
that okay? So,
Are we going deep and nerdy about the Bayh-Dole Act? And
no, I don't want to talk about that specifically,
patent
but
licensing?
When we had our little conversation before the world changed over the past 2 months,
Yeah.
even further, I mean,
Those were nice days. What was it, December?
Go back to
Yeah, December we were having a conversation about that.
I mean, one of the things that, you know, I teach part of your intellectual property book because I think it really breaks down a complex topic very
thank you.
clearly. And it's a very complex topic because it's a philosophical debate, especially in this country, about what intellectual property is for. So I want to bring that back to here because, like, one of the things, this really is me going sideways, just so you know, but one of the things that has troubled me about the current moment we're in academia is that we're sort of, you know, we're responsible to the federal government because of the economic entanglements, and those go back to exactly what you just said, right? That you know, there was that New York Times article a few weeks ago where they showed that the graph, and they showed that at the moment in which universities could profit from intellectual property shifted things. I think that's really important because that is relevant to how we are currently so enmeshed in the federal government that we're affected by the lever. So can you say a little bit more about that?
I mean, I think, look, all the land-grant universities of this country were dependent on the federal government for their very existence starting in the 1860s. So that's not a new thing necessarily. And of course, so many of our best universities have been dependent on state governments as well, which was at least healthy because it kept the cost of attendance low and gave a spirit to universities that they were in the service of the people of their state. And thus, we who work at these universities are accountable to the people of our state, that we're public servants, and there was also just a deep appreciation. And so if you look at a state like Wisconsin, which up until very recently had tremendous public support for its university system and one of the finest state university systems in the world. And UW-Madison is one of the premier research institutions of the world, and was deeply loved by the people of Wisconsin and always supported. And that has flipped just in the last 15 or 20 years to the point where it's now seen as a problem and an enemy. And there was a concerted ideological campaign toward that, but it also flows from a particular ideological moment. Again, you could put it in the Reagan years or maybe the Thatcher years of seeing what we do around here as being an individual good for an individual student. And thus we've shifted the cost to the student, assuming that it's only the student who benefits from the education and the certification that we give the student, right? Once you individualize this transaction and you make it a transaction, and you don't think of the fact that when a student emerges from a university like this with a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or PhD, that's actually better for everybody, that it's not just about that student and there's no zero sum. Once you get around that, the notion of public goods, the notion of that the private sector can't do that kind of work, all of which was like sort of built into our sense of what government should do and what citizens are as late as the 1960s. It influenced so many things, like different programs of the Great Society were all about making up for market failure and for enhancing the public good. And then the 70s were tumultuous, and then we come out of the 70s with Reagan's idea that it's all about the individual. And at that very moment, starting in the late 1980s, you see states raising tuition and decreasing public funding for universities to make it so the individual student carries the burden. And that just like creates tremendous friction and tension in just right down to the relationship we have with students, right? Where somehow I am supposed to be serving the consumer rather than guiding a person through an exploration as a mentor or a non-commercial relationship. And that, I think, affects everything we do. It's not something we can undo, right? It's not something we're going to be able to unravel. But if we talk about it that way, we might be able to correct for some of its excesses.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I wanted to bring this in now is because I feel like it connects with what you were saying, that in the past 40 years we've seen this shift in discourse, at least, about what the role of the university is. But there's a sense in which being part of the system, we're complicit in a certain sense, because we're part of this vast system, right? Yeah. And we present ourselves as though we're apart from it, but we're not.
Sure, but what are our choices? I mean, we could sit under a tree. We could sit under a tree like our ancestors did and create. Wait for knowledge. Right.
But I guess the reason I wanted to ask that is because, like, as you were talking about AI, I keep thinking about it from my perspective as someone who uses and tries to improve these tools, and like, it's not how I think about it. But then I was like, well, maybe there is this difference between what we have and what we could have.
Yeah.
And so you're really emphasizing something about the sort of commercial media onslaught, about technologies that sort of, have been around for 10 years. Well, many of us have used them, but it's true, they've been behind a certain technical curtain. But like, there also have been moments where we've moved back, like you've written about like changes for, free software, and that, so there are potential like good things. Like, I just think all of the tools that there's so many tools available to right now that you can just download and you can run on your laptop. It's an extraordinary moment for individual experimentation.
Absolutely.
And so,
And if we can keep that small scale level of play, experimentation, learning, and full engagement with it, which is like what it was like to own a 65 Mustang and want to fix it yourself and improve it yourself and soup it up yourself. And, that culture, that hacker culture is glorious. And it was I think the dominant culture of the early computer years when we came up learning how to write in BASIC and then COBOL and anything else like that. But also just in the early personal computer years where we could add a new soundboard or, and just like open up the hood as opposed to this sealed box that you can only customize by going to the App Store. And that's not real customization, right? Or adaption. And therefore, this might as well be run by elves, little elves in there that are doing magic, right? So to my students, to my daughter, this is just, a thing that things happen in. But there's no way to really understand what's going on unless you decide to study it. And only specialists do that now.
that's right. I mean, it's true, I guess. So maybe I can ask, because you want to talk about how we're not just here in the university, but we're part of a larger structural issue. But we have only certain levers, and the one lever I have is in my classroom. So
Right.
How do I encourage that kind of play and deliberation at a moment in which, one of the things I heard from the author Marilyn Robinson a few months ago was we need, learning comes from friction.
Yeah.
And I think that, I sort of think that's true, and I also don't know if I sort of am of two minds on this, because on the one hand, I do...
Sounds like friction.
Indeed. I haven't learned anything yet. I mean, I feel like on the one hand, that moment of discovery is itself a dopamine rush, at least for those of us in this room. But it's also true that there's so many barriers to education, and our students and people in general are so varied. And there's a way in which, lecturing is the most inefficient form of education, because all you're doing is conveying this one-to-many thing. And so I guess what I'm asking here is, I feel like sometimes that friction turns into a brick wall. And so I want to understand, what should we do when, now we're trying to foster that kind of friction that students can, grow from and play with, when they have your elves doing everything for them. Right. So what do we do?
Well, as long as we have classrooms, we have hope, right? Because you can create a culture in a classroom that applauds that friction, encourages that friction. You can create a habit of mind in the classroom that grants a smile and an affirmation to exploration or to taking a chance with an idea. And again, that dopamine rush. I mean, a lot of this stuff does come down to the affective, right? And as teachers, we are in charge of the mood of the classroom, or at least we try to be in charge of the mood of the class. Sometimes we bring our own bad mood, and that's a bad day. Right?
It's a different kind of learning experience.
I know, but that's why we have coffee to get us in that, okay, at least I'm feeling something here, and I'm gonna bring the energy. But that's our core responsibility, is to manage the affective in the classroom and have that sense of openness and gentleness, but also with enough excitement and enthusiasm. So you called lectures inefficient. Sure, but efficiency is not always the goal.
That was the wrong word.
That's right. It's the word of the day.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of things that lectures fail at. One thing that lectures succeed at is the transference of enthusiasm, right? So I look at lectures like sermons, right? Sermons are not archaic. They're not the only way to delve into the spiritual. They're not necessarily the best way to delve into the spiritual. They're not even the best way to experience, let's say, the teachings of Christ. There are many other ways of doing that, but people still go to sermons because they're communal, because they are performative, because they have emotion attached and enthusiasm attached, sometimes gravity attached, right? Sometimes the best sermons are really dark and really scary and really sad. But that's because that's what the moment or the text of the day demands. And remember, the best sermons are also about the text of the day. Like, this is the text that we're dealing with. Whether it's a text from the New Testament, or you're talking about taking apart a passage of the Talmud, you are creating a moment where you're trying to get minds to bubble, and ideally hearts to follow. And one of the things that happens in religion is, because really that's where the word propaganda comes from, you propagate the gospels. Religions are often more about adhering to a belief, subscribing to a belief, and being guided through that, rather than taking apart what you're offered, right? So we have a different job where we have, in the classroom, we should be willing to think of lectures as sermons, but not being preachers, and that's a fine line to go by. But we should never think of a lecture as information delivery, right? That is a recipe for a disastrous class, because we have so many better ways of delivering information, and that's never really our job. I don't think it ever really was. So I'm a big fan of a beautifully crafted lecture, which is a hard skill.
Yeah.
And some of us are better at that than they are at running discussions, and some of us are better at that than creating group work that works. So I tend to lecture in front of very large classes, because I think that's kind of where my strength is, and others in my department are less enthusiastic about doing that. So, but I walk into class, hopefully properly caffeinated, with this notion that I want students to leave wondering whether what I said is right, whether what I said was complete, wondering whether they can come up with 8 or 9 questions to go deeper. And if I get any of that back, I know I did my job. It doesn't happen all that often, but I try.
Yeah, I like that idea, like that deliberation here is actually that form of,
Right.
of sort of self-asking. Yeah, that's wonderful. And I guess one thing I was curious about is, so maybe you've answered that, this is one of the questions I wrote down when you mentioned deliberation. So, because you talked about the places we deliberate. So one of them is in classrooms and discussion sections. Another, I guess, is in religious contexts as well. What other spaces are under threat right now that you were talking about?
I mean, libraries, museums, right? They're spaces of, if not open deliberation, then at least deliberative exploration. And all these are public institutions that we invested heavily in from the public sector, again, 60 years ago, that was the last time we had massive investment in these systems from the public. And we've been running on fumes ever since. To the point where we still build museums. They're often gift shop forward, but we build them and we love them, and it's lovely that we do. We're not building libraries like we should. We're not even meeting demand for libraries, which are crowded in every city in America. But we don't think of libraries as deliberative exploratory spaces as much as we should. We think of them as information delivery systems or other sorts of things, but there are lots of ways we use libraries in our daily lives that are deliberative, and we should emphasize that. And that's one thing librarians, especially local librarians, are very into, this notion of this is the space where community comes together, where you meet people of different social classes, and they have spaces that allow for that sort of sharing of the moment. I do think that's the sort of thing we might try to imagine ways that we can simulate deliberative spaces, which we have not done, right? Okay. Social media, that's why I call anti-social media, my book's anti-social media, because it's about mapping a social map, right? Creating a social map of your connections, but it's not about forging spaces for deliberation. It's forging spaces for comments, which is very different, right? But the notion that you would design a circle through software that you would engage with that would be social. But you're never really designing none of these companies are really designing a circle and calling it social media.
Right. It's always sort of this, I guess, asymmetric relationship of one to the other. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking when you talked about libraries, in your book on Google, the Googleization book, you do talk about how, one of the threats of the modern internet is actually the destruction of the library as a space.
The replacement or the devaluing of a library. And we've seen that. I went to the opening of the Williams College Library, like the big opening ceremony that I was invited to speak. It was really a cool moment. It was a long time ago. Williams College opened up a new library maybe 2003 or something. And I got to open for Vartan Gregorian, which was an awesome moment.
Wow.
And of course, he gave a far better speech than I did. But it was a cool moment where this liberal arts college devoted to all of the values that we like to say we're all promoting in these spaces, with a tremendously wealthy alumni base, was celebrating this temple of learning in the middle of their campus. And it's a really impressive library. And I found out from the I think it was the director of the library, that there were several board members who were very much against building a new library because they just didn't see the point. They just didn't see why there should be an edifice when everybody had laptops. And that was one of those moments that struck me. And one of the things was the board members were like, well, when they have Google, what do they need a library for, right? Which of course sends chills through every librarian when you hear that, right? And it does take some explanation for why Google doesn't suffice as a replacement for the library, but
does it work if you explain it?
Not always. It depends. The richer the person, the harder it is to explain.
I mean, it's hard when I tell my students, go use an index. I mean, you even talk about this, right?
Right.
I mean, when we talk to our colleagues in the library, they say, please send your students, and we tell them to go, and then some of them go, and they say, oh my gosh, there are these databases where I don't have to wade through useless things.
Exactly.
But that's like a 10%. It's part of that friction, the friction of walking down the road. So
I had a weird moment in my class this semester where a student had submitted a paper that had a number of citations that were real. They weren't fake citations, but they were like way outside what I had assigned the reading. And like, this is a first year, it's like citations that this person probably wouldn't have stumbled across. And so either this person did deep research through the university databases, which I thought was unlikely, or they were using some sort of generative AI to just come up with things. And I asked her to meet with me, and I said, so like, tell me how you got these citations. And it turns out that she had sort of misunderstood what the Writing Center had told her. The Writing Center had told her that when you have a citation and you want to put it in MLA form, you go to one of these sites and you just plug in the author and the title, and it creates an MLA format citation, and then you could stick it in. And she thought what they were telling her to do was take the sentence that you wrote and plug it in, and it will find an appropriate citation that talks about that sentence and then give you the MLA citation. So that's what she was doing. She was like writing out a sentence, and then plugging it in and creating a thoroughly inappropriate citation that might have been about the same subject, and then sticking it in the paper. And I said, the whole idea of citation is you're supposed to be showing me what you read, like what you discovered, so I can like check back on the knowledge or go deeper. And that had never been explained to her, why we do citations, like what the purpose of a citation is. And then so when she realized that, she's like, oh, well, that's not helping me at all. I said, exactly. So we got, it was a good moment, right? But it was also a use of generative AI that I think was non-standard. But then I explained to my student, like without naming the student who had done this, like, hey, I came across this phenomenon I didn't even really think about. And it turns out a lot of my students had been doing it the same way and just had misunderstood the instructions from the Writing Center or the advice from the Writing Center. And so here they were constructing papers just out of like, essentially citations they never encountered in real life. And I went back and I typed in some sentences that I might have written in something at some point. And like as Siva Vaidhyanathan writes, and I would write something out, and then I went to these citation creation sites, and what it cited was, in many cases, somebody else arguing against me or criticizing me. So it was like a completely inappropriate citation to what I was saying. And one of them was, I wrote in, Siva Vaidhyanathan is the greatest professor in the world, to see like what would come up for that. What would be the possible citation for that? And a scathing review from Rate My Professors came up, which clearly indicated I was not the greatest professor in the world. And so that was a perfect example of how useless those sites are. But
maybe they're good as a memento mori, right? They remind you, people don't think you're so great.
Right.
I sometimes do read those, and then I think sort of, then I need to go sit down for a bit. Okay, so let's take some questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is building off what we were just discussing, and maybe you can, vamp for a bit while I read the rest of these. So, could you talk more about how to help students develop capacities for deliberation and judgment when the invitation to offload thinking to AI tools is so enticing and promoted?
Oh gosh, I wish I knew. I wish I were an expert at this. I think I'm just another person trying to figure it out. I do know that the job is different now than it was 5 years ago, for COVID and a whole lot of other reasons. The job is harder now. It's harder to convince students or inspire students to be patient and to think of this process as one in which it does not occur in a straight line, and it's not about the accumulation of credentials. And I do think a lot of that change came out of what I'm encountering now. What you're encountering now is the current first-year students, if they came straight out of high school, missed ninth grade for COVID. And what we just got done with are those who missed 12th grade, which wasn't that bad because who really studies in 12th grade? But then 11th grade was horrifying. Like 2 years ago, the first year students I had required so much extra inspiration. I mean, a lot of them had the skills, but that they didn't have the curiosity. They didn't have the sense of mission. And they were so much harder to inspire to just like think beyond what's on the test. And that was the hardest year I've ever had teaching, was 2 years ago. And then last year was a little bit better, but not that much better. And then this year, significantly better, which I think tells you something about how useful ninth grade is, if you're gonna miss it. But I'm hoping next year, like, because nobody liked or learned anything in 8th grade, will be a lot better, right? If you're gonna miss a year, 8th grade's a great year to miss. I actually spent 8th grade in India, so like I did miss 8th grade, and it was awesome. Although I missed like all the new sitcoms, and I didn't know what I was talking about when I got back. But I'm hoping it gets better as the students get, earlier in the year they missed. At the same time, I don't know all the ways to inspire. Every year and every semester when I start out, I convince myself I have to relearn it. That's the only way to stay fresh. Like, I don't want to rely on what worked in the past. Not that I think students change all that much all the time, COVID accepted, but it's that I want to change all the time. Like, I don't want to be that old professor who says, well, this worked for me, and so I'll always do it. I like unlearning what I did before. So I've changed my grading systems and changed them back 4 or 5 times. I've, tried new suites of learning technologies and found that most of them are frustrating, but I keep trying them because, like, why not? Something might work, or at least change the way I think about teaching. I solicit feedback from students in different ways, try different classroom setups, and it's, I just, even though I have strong opinions about what works and what doesn't, I don't pretend that I will always be best in those situations. And I do feel like I serve my students better if I'm a little off balance, and therefore have to like struggle a bit with them. So that, I'm not sure that's applicable advice for everybody or even good advice for everybody, but it's how I've been doing it.
But I mean, it's consonant with what you were saying about the wondering, right? You leave them wondering, you leave yourself wondering, right? That off balance is actually part of what it means to continue to never be satisfied, is to continue to learn.
And I like to tell them when I'm confused or unsure. Like I like to make them understand that this is an exploration process to me. Right? I teach a big survey class, Introduction to Digital Media. Introduction to Media Studies, which means I'm actually an expert on maybe 10% of what I teach in the survey. And I tell them that. I said, most of what I'm teaching you is a distillation of the expertise and scholarship of people in field, sometimes in our department, but not me. So you're getting it third hand from me. And I'm gonna do my best because I'm excited about this stuff. So I'll do my best to explain it, but sometimes you're gonna ask me a question and I'm gonna direct you to a real expert. And I think that helps. So they kind of understand what we do better, like that we are sometimes fairly narrow specialists, even if we talk a good game otherwise.
Demystify the epistemology.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Is there a pertinent question? Perfect. This is now from Zoomland.
Okay, Zoom, good. Zoomland.
Zoomlandia, where all cameras are off and everyone is eating or sleeping.
Yes.
Great, hi. So we have a question from Elliot Anderson. As an artist who's technology based, serendipity is essential to creativity, something I try to teach my students. How do you think AI can introduce serendipity and chance?
Oh boy, I mean, I think AI is designed, almost necessarily to avoid serendipity. So I think if you care about serendipity, as we should, you have to build it into your practice outside of the technology. I say that as someone who's never created anything creative ever. So, but that's my best guess, because everything about the nature of AI is to reduce, simplify, and structure, and therefore, to avoid serendipity and to avoid those sorts of things. Now, doesn't mean you're not going to get weirdness with anything. Like anybody who's used an image generator knows that stuff comes out weird, right? And that's kind of fun and almost serendipitous, but it's not really serendipitous. It's just an error or a misapplication. Maybe we read it as serendipity as humans, but it's really just an error. So, using tools like that, maybe in a collaborative way with other people, maybe using it in a way that interacts directly with your audience in the moment, right? Having it more as an active installation than a fixed work might be a way of thinking about that, right? If you can create your own AI tool that interacts with your audience, that could be kind of a cool way of doing it. I'm totally winging it now. I'm totally out of my element.
Could I say something?
Please, save me.
Well, I don't know. I mean, so I think, I'm not in a discipline like that. But one thing, I've talked to a lot of people who teach writing. Yeah. And I do get the same kind of response, which is they really do encourage their students to use generative tools because, in the words of one of my colleagues, it's an opportunity for invention. So it's less about, I think, creativity in a general sense, but just pulling you out of yourself. Because I think as a person, we're always stuck in ourselves.
But that's why those of us who write for a living and haven't used generative AI use writing groups, writing partners, editors. It pulls you out of yourself, right? We use other humans for that, which I think is so much better. This is the problem, is like if you're going to use a generative AI tool as the person you're bouncing ideas off of, I'm not sure that's better than a human being, except maybe a human being's not available at 1 a.m.
Or maybe you're worried about talking to another person. I think it's part of those barriers again. I I mean, this is when you're teaching someone, you know, to write and they feel disempowered. That's what they,
Okay.
you know, someone's like, I don't know what to write about. I don't know, I've had these experiences sitting in my office with someone, where it's like, what am I gonna write my final paper about? And then there I am listing 20 topics for them, and that feels, I don't know, not so great. But with one of them, I said, well, look, take you know, a bunch of your notes, throw them into, I gave them a prompt, and they got something out and they didn't like it. And I said, great, now go think about something else. So it somehow got them over, like,
Interesting.
themselves in some way.
Okay.
But I don't know. I mean, this is a good point.
Yeah, as long as
people are always a good source.
that sounds like, yeah, building it into the process rather than routing around the process.
Yeah, it's a tool
Because
and not a...
writing is thinking, and as long as the student is still thinking, as long as the writer, whether student or not, is still thinking, then we're doing a little bit better. It's just so easy to stop thinking.
Yeah.
You know, it's so tempting. Thinking's hard.
We have some questions about that.
That's my next book. Thinking's
Thinking
hard.
is hard. So do you want to talk about thinking? Let's talk first about the academy. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. So one question here is, how do you think we can prepare and preemptively safeguard the usage of AI in higher ed systems, since our capacity of being reactive is constantly decreasing?
Oh,
Just an easy question.
our capacity of being reactive. Well, maybe the person who asked this question might clarify if that person's still here.
Pedro, do you want to?
Yeah. What do you mean reactive exactly?
It feels like one of the fundamental factors is time,
Oh, yeah.
and time scales are reducing.
Oh, yeah.
Timescales are reducing for Zoom, yes.
So as humans, our capacity of reacting is not reducing.
Ah.
How can we be preemptive? So we
Oh.
don't have to be chasing something that we will never reach.
Oh, God. I don't know. I mean, that's huge, right? That's huge. So our capacity for reacting, our capacity,
It's like the news cycle,
it's
right?
not necessarily an internal capacity, it's an external capacity to if you went to graduate school in the 20th century, as I did, you probably were fooled into thinking that this life would be one of calm examination, quiet moments, 2 hours with a book, as it maybe was for you in grad school, right? You know, when was the last time you had 2 hours to spend with a book, right? You know, we don't have a short attention span. We have a high demand problem, a high demand on our attention problem. And that's not just because the job of being a professor or, a staff member at a university has squeezed out all of that time, which in many ways was the reason we chose this life, right? We eschewed the big bucks to have a better pace of life and an ability to think deeply, an ability to experiment, have that experiment go badly, try a different experiment. And that 6-year clock was big, but it was rarely a 6-month clock or a 6-week clock. But we've installed a whole bunch of 6-month and 6-week clocks in our work life. We haven't. It's been imposed upon us. So that's a bigger problem. And that's one of the reasons I think we are tempted by these efficiency tools, right? We're tempted to think that, the next version of Outlook is going to help me structure my time so much better because, but it turns out now everybody knows what you're doing and can send you a calendar invitation just because you have a blank space on your calendar. And pretty soon you have no blank spaces in your calendar. And still nothing gets done in all those filled spaces of the calendar, right? And I think we sense that, right? There was a sense of cacophony in our lives coming from these boxes, coming from all of the entertainment in our lives that are all pulling on our imagination. When my daughter was little and her mother was worried that she wasn't reading as much as her parents were at that age, I reminded her mother that we didn't have Netflix, nor any of the games. And had we, I definitely would have been watching Netflix rather than, The Price is Right. And I definitely would have been playing video games that were more interesting than Pac-Man, as much as I loved Pac-Man. So, and that was a quarter. If my quarter ran out and my Pac-Man deflated, that was the end of it, right? There was no playing for 8 hours at a time. So just the offerings, but we have that same situation, right? It's not just kids. Like, we have so many other things that are cheaper, easier. They're popcorn and potato chips in our lives, and we have to actually like concentrate on not concentrating on something. It's a weird way of life that is cacophonous. I think like it's like walking through Times Square with all that stimulation, but we carry Times Square around with us all the time, screaming at us. And I have a book outlined that I've been hoping to write for about a decade and haven't even started, called Cacophony, about this environmental disaster that we've created for us that inhibits not so much, well, it does inhibit our individual ability to think deeply, but I really think it assassinates our collective ability to think through our problems. Because we're just overwhelmed with lots of different emotions and lots of different signals that inhibit our ability to think deeply and systematically, individually and collectively about our problems. So like, let's say we actually want to address climate change. Big problem, requires a lot of minds, but we all have to agree on the nature of the problem and then figure out strategies to address it. That's the sort of thought process we haven't even tried. We haven't tried to think through, what are we going to do next time there's a pandemic, which is coming. We know it's coming. We know we're not ready. We may be in worse shape than we were last time, bizarrely, but we have, you can't find the book or the convening moment or the World Health Organization meeting that asks, how should we handle the next pandemic in a way that, does the least damage to us and saves the most lives? We're just not capable of having that conversation. And it's not just because of these phones, it's just because we've structured life in a way that inhibits that. And I think that's one of the reasons why democracy is poorer and so much less capable of handling big questions and having imagination that might help us through that moment, right? So, yeah, again, sad stuff.
That's good. These questions are sort of the same, so we'll put them
Right.
aside.
Is there one on there about the NBA playoffs? Because I'd like to talk about that.
So you have solutions for the NBA
It's just much more fun.
well, let me ask. There's another question on Zoom. Okay, let me ask one because we're running up running out the clock. So this one I think is a good framing for the stakes. What does artificial intelligence, that's in quotes, tell us about a true intelligence or wisdom we need to foster in ourselves?
I love this question.
Emotional, social, collective, self-aware, collaborative, visionary.
I like that. Okay, so this actually is really inspirational. I love how that question's framed because I can imagine having a class, and actually now I feel bad because I just finished up an undergraduate seminar on AI and democracy. It would have been great to start out the class with this exercise. Make a list of the values that are necessary for a thriving democracy, and then contrast that with the values that are embedded in AI systems, and how far off are they? And is it just an irrelevant question, or do they actually work against each other, right? And I think, again, a classroom is an ideal place to ask these questions to get to this notion of, again, one of the things I'm really pushing is that the health of a democracy should not just be judged by like voter turnout, and certainly shouldn't be judged by which party wins, except in some extreme cases, but really should be about our ability to feel like we matter as citizens and actually matter as citizens. And the ability to accept when our side loses, understanding that the rules won't be changed on us, and if we do a better job of motivation and collaboration and persuasion, we might win next time. And like getting students to get that is really exciting, because that's kind of how they live their lives in their clubs and their fraternities, right? When they have some simulation of democracy at that very local level, you can see that they actually know how to do that kind of stuff, and they talk about it. And that's neat, because then you can say, okay, how come it doesn't scale up very well? And then I could say, Montesquieu wrote that it wasn't going to scale up, and then Madison wrote Federalist 10 and said it could scale up, and let's talk about that. And then, like, what about our technological systems that either enhances or impedes this stuff? And you can really let it flower into something pretty cool at that point. I was in 2016, before the election, summer of 2000, maybe August of 2016, my daughter was 10 years old, and I was thinking back to 1976 when I was 10 years old. And I was watching my daughter respond to the political moment as a 10-year-old. And so here was a 10-year-old girl who was fairly convinced, for very good reasons, that her teenage years would be with a woman president. And she was so excited about that. She was out knocking on doors. She went as Rosie the Riveter for Halloween. I mean, it was a great moment of optimism that, I choke up when I think about what she was like in those months. But I also knew that she was listening closely to what was going on and who was running against the woman she thought would be president. And she knew, because we don't hide much from her, that this was a man who had sexually assaulted multiple women and who had bragged about it. And she knew that he was corrupt and self-centered and a bully. She had watched the debates. She had seen, Trump loom over Clinton like the worst kind of, bully you could imagine. That was such a disgusting moment in the history of American politics, and yet we just walked right by it. And I looked at her and tried to figure out what was going on in her mind and whether she would ever naively believe in American democracy the way that I had. Because in 1976, when I was her age, the two candidates were decent people. Neither one of whom, one had been raised in the deep segregated South and yet had eschewed racism and had come out as a champion for civil rights, was fairly conservative Democrat, no McGovern liberal. And the Republican was a very decent person who had never been accused of being a racist or an anti-Semite or a sexist, and had, been just untouchable ethically, which is why he had been selected as Nixon's vice president. And he had, served 2 frustrating years as president in the wake of Nixon's resignation at a time of high inflation. It wasn't a great time for America, except that in 1976, in the summer of 1976, as I, as a 10-year-old, was watching these 2 parties argue it out, where these 2 decent, intelligent, experienced public servants differed on what tax rates should be, differed on what military spending should be, differed on strategies for the Cold War, differed on ways to address inflation, right? They were having actual arguments and presenting their choices to the American people, and the American people selected one of them over the other, happened to be the one my family supported over the other one. And I thought, oh, this is how democracy is always going to be. And if my side had lost, I would have been okay with that, because this is American democracy and sometimes you lose. And then I would have hoped that my side would do better 4 years later. And that's what happened. The Republicans 4 years later ran a more popular candidate with a more persuasive message, and and defeated Carter, and so on and so on, basically up until Clinton's impeachment, when the Republican Party, I think, gave up on respecting elections. But you have, in that moment, a 10-year-old who, in the summer of the bicentennial, with the tall ships in the harbors, with then Bruce Jenner winning the decathlon at the 1976 Olympics and wearing red, white, and blue shorts and waving an American flag as he crosses the finish line in the last event of the decathlon, like a real high moment of belief and trust, just 2 years after a president resigned in disgrace, just a year after the fall of Saigon. And it should have been a real low moment to believe in the potential of American democracy, given all we had just been through. And yet, for a bunch of different reasons, the country had elasticity and resilience. I'm lucky in the sense that I was offered that opportunity to be naively optimistic about American democracy. And as part of an immigrant family, we were already in love with this country for many irrational reasons that are sometimes rational reasons. So that's carried through, and even through the darkest times, like I've never given up on this sort of, John Dewey optimism about what we could do. My daughter will never have that, because my daughter saw a perverse system where she woke up the day after the election and I had to explain to her that her candidate did get more votes but won't be president. That's the country you live in, sorry. And yeah, the guy who will be president for the next 4 years treats women terribly, and lots of other people even worse. So yeah, this is what, so she has never enjoyed even a moment of idealization of democracy. And I just wonder how that's going to affect her in the long run. So she no longer has that sense of public engagement either. She's become a person much more focused on the personal, where she said for years that her fictional hero was Leslie Knope from Parks and Recreation, and that's the route she wanted to take in life. She's now decided that she will have a very different life and a very different career, and it, might have anyway. But I do think that as sort of a parable for our country's inability to be idealistic about democracy right now. And when we lose that passion for it, we lose the rhythm and rhyme of democracy. We lose the spirit that Walt Whitman and Woody Guthrie tried to inject into our sense of ourselves and the sense of belief in other people as citizens. It makes democracy almost impossible. It makes democracy merely a procedure and not something of faith. And I do think democracy needs faith and passion for it to thrive, because times will be tough, and the temptations to yield to autocracy or worse are always there. So, yeah.
That was a sermon.
That was a sermon.
That was pretty
right.
incredible.
So nobody wants to talk about the Warriors?
I think
All right.
there's some people who do.
All right.
Well, maybe we can talk about that off stage.
Yeah.
So I want to thank all of you for your questions. I want to thank you for your answers.
Oh, yeah,
especially
I wanna-
that last one. I also want to say I'm so sorry to your daughter and to you. I mean, that must be hard for both of you.
I mean, it's harder for the country, right? we're doing fine. Like, some people are disappeared.
No, it's,
So no, that's the other thing. And frankly, my daughter grew up in Charlottesville, Virginia, and saw Nazis walk through our streets when she was just 13. So, and kill one of our neighbors. So she's never going to be naive about anything, and that is probably to her benefit. So we've had a close-up view to a lot of bad stuff.
And so that, I guess, informs why you say this is not just what happens here, but it's
Right.
There aren't walls, right?
Right,
It's all
exactly.
walls.
Yeah.
Well, there are no walls here, so maybe after we thank him for talking, you can come up and ask questions.
Yeah,
Would
sure.
that be okay?
Yeah, I'm going to hang out a little bit. This has really been a lovely and warm reception. Everybody who's hosted me today has been really great to me. So, and I really appreciate you hanging out with me this late in the evening. So, cool.
Thank you so much for coming.